Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another Kung Fu Talk. We're here with another episode before the end of the year. Please, I would like to ask you subscribe, share, and comment so to help us engaging in this social media platform. We're going to be on YouTube and Spotify as well. So I love to talk about many with many different martial arts instructors, masters, and now in tonight today actually I have the presence of Sifu Dwight Woods. How are you doing today?
Very good. How are you, sir?
I'm great. I'm a big fan of your work. I'm a big fan of you. When I used to live in Miami, I was so sad because exactly the days where you had class, I was teaching class as well up in Fort Lauderdale.
Ah,
A
oh
big
man.
friend of mine, Sebastian, he actually went to took a few classes with you back in the days. He was
Was
telling me
that
there was a
Sebastian Bonilla?
He was a boat guy. I'm not sure, like with like his last name, but his name
Okay.
was Sebastian. Great guy. He took some classes, was not many because of work. Was busy with college
Right.
and work as well.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
and I love how you are respectful in I don't know the Jeet Kune Do platform communities. You know, we see that like a lot of people they like to express their work, and you're always respectful in the comments. You always showing your idea with professionalism. And I really like that because we see there's a great martial artist behind the keyboards when we see things like that. I want to ask you.
That's very kind of you.
Thank you. No, yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. And I want to ask you, what is the what first inspired you to start practicing martial arts, and how did you discover Jeet Kune Do?
Okay, so based on the stuff I see in your background,
Yeah,
right?
I
So it all
haven't been.
started in the late 1960s when I was living in Hong Kong and I was hanging out at the Shaw Brothers Studios. That's not really
Ooh.
true.
That would be a great start, but I'm sure
I know,
your story is
I know,
greater.
man. But it would be awesome if that was. It's close to that. My inspiration came literally from Wang Yu, Chinese one-armed swordsman
Mhm.
in 1969. That's what got me hooked. And I lived in a place where, and people have heard me describe this before. I lived in a place where we had a diet of 6 different kung fu films every few weeks.
Wow.
So I started with One Armed Swordsman and then went on. So I saw Wang Yu, I saw Chan Sing in Return of the One Armed Swordsman, right? And just almost everything that was released in Hong Kong back then, I watched
Wow.
right up until 71, 72, when actually 71, when The Big Boss was released. And as a connoisseur of kung fu films, right? Bruce Lee's first fight scene in Big Boss changed my life because immediately there was no extended fight sequences, long fist kung fu, big
Mhm.
motions. You hit the guy, he gets back up 2 seconds later, and he's back in the fray, and it's just going on and on and on and on. Bruce Lee would hit guys, and they would drop, and they would be out of the fight.
Wow.
And so I sat up in my chair, and I was like, what is this? And that's how it started. So back then, no internet. Um, there were magazines, of course, but we didn't have. But I lived in Barbados, so we didn't have U.S. magazines or even British magazines or even Hong Kong magazines coming to us on a regular and consistent basis. So you had to go and search. You had to go to the bookstore. People might not know that there's such a thing as the bookstore, and you might have to ask them to get something for you.
Wow.
You know, so that's what I did. Um, by the time of Bruce Lee's passing, right? So that was my introduction to Bruce Lee. So
Mm-hmm.
then I kept watching the kung fu films, and I would literally go to the movies with a notebook, and I would make notes on fighting styles, and then I would go home and practice what I had seen on the screen, right? And so when Bruce Lee came along, whatever material you could get on him, that's how that started. And you know that 71. So then Fist of Fury comes out. Then we, I remember Way of the Dragon. I don't remember it being released in Barbados as Way of the Dragon. So we might have been, for some reason, we might have been one of those markets where it came out as Return of the Dragon. Okay. But in any case, within 2 years, Bruce Lee's gone. And now the superstar status of Bruce Lee starts to grow. You see? And now, because his rise was a worldwide phenomenon, now you could go to the bookstore and you could get this stuff, right? You could get this stuff. And sometimes, if you're a fanatic, you end up with two of them. Right? So yeah, so as the that hero status of Bruce Lee started, right? Now you're able to get material more readily. And then along came Black Belt magazine, and I don't know if you know this. Bruce Lee passed away in July of 1973, and I think it was, let's see, July, August, September. I think it was October. I don't have it here with me. October of 1973. His friend Mito Uehara. So Mito Uehara is one of the people behind the publication of the Tao of Jeet Kune Do, which, as you know, was put out by Ohara Publications,
Mm-hmm.
right? So Mito Uehara was one of the people behind that. He's also one of the people behind this. Okay, Bruce Lee's fighting method, which now this is the original hardcover of the 4 softcover books.
Yeah,
So
I do have them over here.
yeah. So this is
Wow.
yeah, that's a unique one, right? But in addition to doing that stuff, because I think that stuff came out like in 77 or thereafter, but in 73 he started a magazine called Fighting Stars.
Mm-hmm.
And for however long Fighting Stars was around, my estimation is that Bruce Lee was on the cover of Fighting Stars. It's got to be at least 90% of the time. So that was how I got a relatively steady diet of Bruce Lee. And then in I don't know the years or what have you. So so there was stuff like this. This is another Ohara Publications thing, right?
Wow.
The best of Bruce Lee. Then there's Black Belt Magazine's Best of Bruce Lee #2, right?
Wow.
This Bruce Lee, My Martial Arts Training Guide. This is actually a ripoff because these guys, this is a British publication. And so they had access to certain photographs and what have you, right? But and so when you read the text of it, that's when you realize that it's a ripoff. Because, like, let me try to find the
Mm-hmm.
the most the most egregious aspect of it. There's a photograph of Bruce Lee in training, right? And the caption says that he's using these stiff, heavy gloves. And that's not at all what's going. Give me 1 second. Let me just try to.
Sure.
Let
Take
me
your
just try
time.
to find it here. Right. It's this picture here. Right. Let's see. This one. Okay. This one right here. And the caption says, where is it? Stiff, heavy gloves, a device to develop forearms. It's not true. Bruce Lee was working on his isometric rack. And so he put a cushion across the metal bar, and then he was pressing up against the metal bar. But because they didn't have the original photograph, they write up this thing about how it's stiff, heavy gloves. He wasn't wearing gloves at all, right? But it was part of your Bruce Lee and Jeet Kune Do education. So of course, right, you welcome it. And then in 1976, so March of 1976, this this magazine came out, and this one of the cover stories on this is the art of Jeet Kune Do beyond Bruce Lee. So it featured none other than Dan Inosanto, right, and talked about his efforts to continue to promote Jeet Kune Do and what have you. So that was 1976. So, you know, for 7 years now, I'm practicing whatever I can, whatever material I can get my hands on. I even joined the local kung fu school, right? Because I figured, okay, well, Bruce Lee, Bruce Lee's a kung fu guy, so I'll go there. But my relationship with them was not too pleasant because I was very Bruce Lee influenced, and what they were doing didn't remind me of Bruce Lee. So I kept questioning, and ultimately they had enough of me. So I went back to my backyard and I would do stuff on my own. And different guys from different schools on the island would come over, and I would work out with them. My best sparring partners were guys from the Shotokan Karate School. I used to meet with them on Sunday mornings before their class started, and we would spar and exchange ideas and what have you. And then I went to work for the airlines, and that gave me the opportunity to start traveling. And so one of the first trips that I made was to pay my respects in Seattle at Bruce Lee's gravesite. And so I did that in 1980. I did it in 1981. I did it in 1982. But also in 1982, I saw an ad in Black Belt magazine for a seminar that Dan Inosanto was going to be teaching at. So I signed up for that seminar in 1983 because I had the realization that my progress in Jeet Kune Do could only go so far if I kept paying respects to the deceased source. But if I wanted to go forward, I should probably find a living source of Jeet Kune Do. So I signed up to spend 2 weeks with 1 week with Dan Inosanto, and second week with Francis Fong, who's a Wing Chun instructor, because I knew that Bruce Lee had formerly studied Wing Chun. I knew that Dan Inosanto was his premier disciple. And so I figured I'd spend 2 weeks with these guys. I'd go back home and I would put stuff together for myself. Because intuitively, I knew, Roland, that Jeet Kune Do was, as Bruce Lee is famous for saying, it was a process and not a product. So I didn't expect anybody to give me Jeet Kune Do. I knew that I would have to train, and I would have to not create it, but I would have to come to an understanding of it for myself. That's the longest answer you ever had, huh?
No, I enjoy it. I love it. That's why I made this show. This show is for you guys to introduce yourself and tell these beautiful stories. And it's beautiful to see how was the process developed from you to first be influenced by Bruce Lee, and now you influence people like me, like other young folks, to practice martial arts. And I love that. It's funny because Bruce Lee was my first influence too when I was back in
Right.
Brazil back in the 2006. I don't know, I used to watch his movies, playing video games and stuff like that. I was like, you know what, I want to be like this guy, but they didn't have any Jeet Kune Do around. And then I signed up for traditional Kung Fu. That's how it started. And then back in 2017, 18, I started into Jeet Kune Do. And now I'm practicing under Sifu Harinder Singh, which is a great guy. But
Yeah.
I love your stuff. I love your stuff. I love everything that you post, your broadcasts. I'm a big fan of your work. And that's
Thank you,
why I have
man.
you here
Thank you.
today.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. I really want you to continue what you're doing, developing martial arts, influence other people's, influence our community, because you are very open-minded and respectful, and I like that, and I like how you show your opinion. Sometimes people, they have different opinions, but even with differences, I still see humbleness, and I still see your joy. I still see your passion through words, through the keyboards. It's fascinating me.
Yeah, and again, this is something that I've said before. I do not operate as an Inasano representative, right? But people know that he's my teacher.
Hmm.
And so from automatically for me, then I behave in a certain way because I would never want anybody to be able to say, oh, look, there's Dwight, that Inasano guy. Look at how he's behaving. Because they will do that, right? They
Exactly.
will do that because there's a category of people out there that I call the Inasanto detractors. Right. Unfortunately, there are some people out there who are not big fans of my teacher. So I
Hmm.
get that, right? I get that. But yeah, so I try to govern myself in public,
Hmm.
right? In a particular way. But in private, it's something different.
Absolutely. Yeah, some people, they want to dictate what others are going to teach or how the art should be published. And if you see the words of Bruce Lee, Jeet Kune Do is the way of expressing yourself. And how can you express yourself if you're still stuck on other people's mentality? Like, some people think that being like expressing Jeet Kune Do, it's like imitating Bruce Lee, and it's not the
Yeah,
truth, right?
yeah, yeah. Well, there's his famous saying about the not imitating somebody else.
Hmm.
So you would think if you're as big a fan of Bruce Lee as you say you are, if you're really into his teachings, then if he says imitating people is not where it's at, then the last thing you would want to do is to try to imitate him. Now, I get it. When I throw a sidekick, well, not anymore, but there was a time where I did what I called channeling Bruce Lee.
Hmm.
You see, because his cinematic depiction of sidekicks are pretty awesome. So there was a time where I didn't try to copy him, but
Hmm.
it was channeling his attitude, his mentality, or what have you, right? But not trying to copy. No, you are
Hmm.
who you are. And so physically, the result is going to be what it is, but hopefully the result is based on proper instruction, proper guidance, and proper execution. You see, but
Hmm.
yeah, but there's some who are like, nah, it's got to look like Bruce. And I'm like,
Hmm.
but you only know cinematic Bruce
Hmm.
because you weren't there, right? No, you weren't there. So to try to move like him when the only images that you have are representative of movie magic
Hmm.
is a dumb thing. I would say.
It's choreography, right?
Yeah, yeah. In Sifu Dan's book, right? We talk about um, about theatrical and functional Jeet Kune Do. You know, because Bruce Lee was very aware. Well, you got to do certain things, right, to bring the audience in.
Hmm.
Okay, right? But that's not, no. There are certain things you have to do, like in demonstrations. There are certain things that you have to do. But if you just do the practical stuff on film, it's not going to sell.
Hmm.
It's going to be too fast. It's going to be too small, right? And nobody's going to see what happened. They'll just see guys falling, right? And nobody's going to be entertained by that.
Exactly. Yeah, you got to put some action. You got to put some
Yeah,
drama. That's why
yeah,
there's so much technology going behind the
yeah,
cameras.
yeah.
Going back to when you saw that is that what you want? In your opinion, what sets Jeet Kune Do apart from other martial arts styles? And that's why did you look into that? You like and you thought that's what I want.
Well, like I said, even in the movies, I had never seen anybody move the way he moved. Okay. So, but somehow, and I think it's because since there were no VHS videos, there was no home video, there wasn't even yet video stores where you could go rent a copy of Enter the Dragon and watch it over and over and over again. There was nothing like that. So, what are we forced to do instead? We're forced to read Bruce Lee's words. You see? Now,
Mhm.
that's a big difference. If you're just watching him move, right? You do not, the message that's conveyed is not the same as when you sit down and you have to read his notes
Yeah.
about stuff. And in doing that, you realize this is not a style the way other styles. And back then, when when they used the word style, they actually meant, in my opinion, they meant the word art.
Mhm.
You see, right? So it's like in Enter the Dragon when the New Zealander guy says, "What's your style?" Right? He's saying, "What art do you train in?" You know, and then
Mhm.
Bruce Lee has the famous, you could call it the art of fighting without fighting, or what have you, right? So I knew from the beginning that this was not a style or an art in the way that Shotokan was a Japanese art, different from Kyokushin, another Japanese art.
Mhm.
And then these two Japanese arts of karate are distinct from the Chinese arts of Kung Fu. And then in Kung Fu, we can have, well, you know, when you grow up watching Kung Fu films, I mean, there's everything that you come across, right? You see,
Mhm.
so I was aware that this was a different approach to martial art. So that is what set it up as distinctive. That it wasn't, it must be this way or you're doing it wrong. You see? Which is not the same thing as saying it can be any way and you can do it anyhow and it's Jeet Kune Do. That is not the same thing. Because if I decide that I'm going to hold my hands like this and I'm going to go like this and call this Jeet Kune Do because I'm expressing myself, I am an idiot because this is not effective punching, right? That's not
Mhm.
going to work in any shape or form. So Jeet Kune Do, not when Bruce Lee said in Bruce Lee wrote in, again, I think it was 1971, in Black Belt magazine, liberate yourself from classical karate, right?
Mhm.
And he says that fighting is simple and total. It is not limited to your perspective, right? He said it's not limited to your conditioning as a Chinese martial artist or a Korean martial artist or a whatever martial artist. So when you understand that type of thing, it doesn't mean that you can do any old thing. No, because there are directives in Jeet Kune Do. Stuff must be simple and non-classical. You do want to apply, let's say the Wing Chun theory of economy of motion.
Mhm.
Okay, but here's the thing: economy of motion is a universal principle. So I can use economy of motion in something that Bruce Lee never trained in. If I happen to have an experience with it, I can apply that Jeet Kune Do principle, which he borrowed from Wing Chun,
Mhm. Mhm.
right, and use it. So all these things and more uh, did set Jeet Kune Do apart for me, right? I had trained a little bit in Shotokan. I had trained in a system called Wushu Quan. I mean, and I was such an avid martial artist. I knew the first three kata from Shotokan, right? Even though my training was on my own, I never joined the club, but
Mhm.
I just learned them from watching. And then I got my hands on Mas Oyama's Kyokushin book, and that's where I discovered that the first three Heian kata of Shotokan are the same first three Pinan kata of Kyokushin. There was just a transfer of name and what have you when Funakoshi came from Okinawa to Tokyo.
Mhm.
You see, so even within the anyhow, that's another story, right? So, but I was just into martial art, period. But realized that Jeet Kune Do was separate and distinct because of this idea of not focusing on classicalism, for
Mhm.
example, and instead being more innovative, I guess we could say, right? Being creative to a certain degree, but definitely being innovative.
Amazing. That's beautiful. How would you describe the core philosophy of using a way as a way and having no limitation as a limitation?
Well, okay. So that is that's a funky one, right? Because okay, think about this. Because we just talked about being creative and innovative, right? Okay.
Exactly.
All
Mhm.
right. So I want to develop my sidekick. Well, see, today, right? Today, people know, oh, grab the kick shield. Okay. But in 1967, there was no such thing as a kick shield. But you know what there was? The blocking shield for American football. Okay. Now, Dan Inosanto had played football in high school and in college. So him, so he joined up, his mind joined with Bruce Lee's mind. It's like, oh, we could use the blocking shield. And that was the first iteration of kick shields in the martial art world. But the people who were using it was the Jeet Kune Do group. It was not a widespread thing. Similarly, with the focus mitts. I mean, you can get focus mitts overnight from Amazon today, right? In the early 1980s, Dan Inosanto had to travel with like a duffel bag of focus mitts to wherever he was going, whatever city or town or even country he was going to do a seminar because everybody didn't have focus mitts. Today, my God, they make them in kid size. They make them in pink for girls, right?
You can customize whatever you want.
You know what I mean? Okay, right? So that was so that's a different thing. Look at the sparring gear. If you look at the 1967 Long Beach Internationals demonstration,
Mhm.
right? So they're using naval headgear, right? The Navy's boxing headgear. The gloves that they're using are actually gloves for the Japanese police training. So it was their baton training. There was a glove. And so they got, Inosanto and Bruce Lee got their hands on a couple pairs of those gloves and modified them a little bit, right? To use like boxing gloves. They
Mhm.
were using, I think it might have been the body armor was maybe from what do you call it, from baseball or something like that I'm not sure about, but the shin gear was definitely from baseball. So that's what I mean about now in a style like Shotokan. There wasn't that kind of innovation. You train by kicking and punching the air. That's what you do, right? You don't take equipment from football and put it into karate training. That's sacrilegious, you see? But that was the mind, right? So that relates somewhat to using no way as way. But we have to be careful because, like I said earlier, it can't, using no way as way does not mean, oh, use any way that you want. Because any way that you want is not efficient.
Mhm.
You have to be in search of efficiency. You have to be in search of um, efficacy. You have to be in search of effectiveness. Jeet Kune Do requires that you do that, right? So, but man, there's the esoteric aspect of it, using no way as way, right?
Mhm.
Having no limitation as limitation. Oh man, that's so cool, right? So it's like this, right? So okay, I'll put you on the spot, Ronald. Ask me a question. Ask any question. The first question that comes to your mind.
um, how do you punch somebody in the face and be effective at the same time without hurting your fist?
Be water, my friend. See how cool I am,
Right.
right? You see? So if I go, well, Ronald, the way you do that, you use no way as way, man. And
Mhm.
and 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 when it comes to that fist thing, have no limitation as your limitation. Don't I sound like the smartest guy on the planet right now? Yes, right?
Exactly.
But it doesn't mean anything unless you can drill down and take it from the esoteric to the practical.
Wow.
You see? So you gotta have a way. And the way that you gotta study Jeet Kune Do. You gotta make sure that you're training Jeet Kune Do with or under someone who knows what the heck they're doing. And what the heck they're doing has nothing to do with mimicking Bruce Lee. It also has nothing to do with this idea that Bruce Lee, I had a guy say this to me one time. Bruce Lee has done all the heavy lifting for us. So his point was there was no need for anyone, and he's one of the Inosanto detractors, right? So what he's trying to say is that Inosanto was being disloyal by going out and studying other things. Because see, once the hand of Bruce Lee has descended upon you, okay, right? You need nothing else in your life, in your martial art life. Because you touched hands with Bruce Lee.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting because it comes to the principle of traditional martial arts. I mean, I respect it. I love it. I do practice. I'm instructor of traditional kung fu. But if you do not put your hands on and practice and develop your style, your adaptability of application, your
Right.
martial arts never is never going to work. That's why you see kung fu versus MMA, and then you see people getting beat up. Wing Chun versus MMA because
Yes.
people are not putting their hands in. They're not doing their hard work like
Yeah.
they're supposed to.
They're not even analyzing. Okay. Because look, you could probably make your kung fu work against MMA if you trained it against MMA. If you analyze what do MMA people do in order to win, and then you go, okay. So their common attacks are stuff like this.
Mhm.
What are the most effective counters that I can develop in my kung fu style against those attacks? But if you don't do that kind of analysis, if you don't do that kind of work, no, it's not going to work. Right? When Bruce Lee
Mhm.
talks about his style being the style of fitting in, you
Mhm.
see, that's a Jeet Kune Do approach. How do you fit in? So if I'm real good at kicking and punching, and you're real good at grabbing legs and arms and taking me down, oh shoot,
I'm not gonna kick you.
right? Okay, now I'm in trouble. Now, if I train to kick and punch against the guy who is a guy who has a super high level
Mhm.
of trying to grab kicks and punches to take me down, now I'm on a better path. But if I never train against that type of stuff, I can't go into that altercation, into that encounter, hoping for the best, right? No football team, whoever's playing whomever today, I think the Dolphins are playing somebody. I
Mhm.
guarantee you, earlier this week at the Dolphins training camp, they were studying their opponent.
Mhm.
So wait, let me make sure I understand this. So it's a smart and logical thing to do in football, but not in martial art. Okay? You stay in your own um, isolated martial art bubble, and everything that you need to know is somehow going to magically occur to you. You know why? Oh, because I'm doing the Bruce Lee stuff. And he did all the heavy lifting. I mean, so, you know, if you think about it, that's literally saying, well, yeah, my body will develop because I'm training in Bruce Lee's heavy lifting art. I don't have to lift myself. He did the lifting and developed his body. So as long as I associate with his thing in some way, I don't have to lift. We could take it literally. It's the stupidest thing in the world.
It becomes a religious thing if you think about it,
Uh,
because I remember I used to practice in a place. Of course, I'm not gonna say anything, but it was interesting because there was a thing where they used to say, "Oh, you Wing Chun, you don't have to spar because whenever you need." Your martial arts is gonna be there. I was like, but do you think just I was a Sanda instructor back then. I was like, as a Sanda instructor that you spar in every single class, how you're not going to be able to adapt and how you're not going to be able to have the feeling of adapting your Wing Chun into a sparring if you're just doing Chi Sao and Pak Sao all day. I was like, this is very interesting. Like, how are you
yeah,
gonna develop your martial arts if you don't get uncomfortable? If you don't get comfortable in an uncomfortable situation, if you don't expose yourself, at least you don't have to go to each school and challenge people, but make sure
yeah,
that you do friends and then you be respectful. Hey, let's spar. Let me try a little bit of your art, like as you did, like you being around Shotokan, karate, traditional kung fu to see what elements you can incorporate into your Jeet Kune Do, into your background of martial arts, so it can
yeah,
be effective and it can evolve one day,
yeah.
right?
And yeah, and in the present day, the opportunity to come across different people, right? And even if you don't want to come across different people, if you don't want to go outside of your bubble, that's fine,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because you do have resources to gain an idea of what is out there. So maybe you do stay in your bubble, right, for whatever reason, because it's better to learn how to defend against something with someone who is really good at it, as opposed to learning how to defend against it with somebody who is pretending that they know. And that's why
Mm-hmm.
people criticized Inasano. You see, but Inasano's thing was, well, I'm going to go to the best. I'm going to learn from the best, because that's a shortcut. That can be a shortcut to getting good.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's just two friends playing around and one is like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to be the jujitsu guy and you be the taekwondo guy, right? And let's see what happens. Yeah, that's better than nothing, right? It's better than nothing.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have the opportunity to train with the best, then that's what you do, right? And look, that's part of Dan Inosanto's background. Dan Inosanto in high school and college worked with Alonzo Amos Stagg. Okay. Now, I was born in Trinidad. I grew up in Barbados. I didn't know how to understand American football until like maybe 1992 or something, right? But so I didn't know who Alonzo Stagg was until Dan Inosanto talked about him. And if you look him up in Wikipedia, you'll see this guy is a huge innovator in the professional sports world in America, in football and basketball. Dan Inosanto spent time with him. You see, so Inosanto, from a young age, his thing was, if you can get to the best, go hang with the best and shortcut your learning. So that's always been his attitude. But because people are like, well, Bruce Lee is the best, so why would you go beyond Bruce Lee? Well, it's because Bruce Lee was the best at Bruce Lee stuff. But in the martial art world, there's other stuff. And Bruce Lee was very aware of that. That's why even in the days when he was thinking in the limited terms of Wing Chun, fencing, and boxing, he was still thinking in terms of going beyond. He went beyond in Seattle and studied judo with Sato Sensei, right? So Bruce Lee was not averse to the idea of studying something else other than what you, right? His library was full of books on martial arts other than, right, Wing Chun, boxing, fencing, judo. It was all over the place, right? So this idea that that there's one way, or if you don't do it the Bruce Lee way, then you're being sacrilegious, you're being disloyal. It's ridiculous. And I hope I answered your question. Now I can't even remember what the
Absolutely.
question was.
No, it was about the philosophy of using a way as a way. No, but this is a
Yeah,
very philosophical question.
yeah,
So
it is. But you don't want to to just always go off in the esoteric direction, because there are people, unfortunately, who will use the esoteric to hide the fact that they don't have a practical answer for it. They don't have a practical approach, you know? So no limitation in practice means not closing yourself off to any sensible avenue of learning, right? So if you're learning how to strike, if you're learning how to kick and punch and elbow and knee, there's no reason for you to limit yourself to that, because you know that grappling is an aspect of combat as well.
Mhm.
You see, it's just important that in this using of no way and way and having no limitation as limitation, you got to learn how to identify things that work together. You see, so if a guy
Mhm.
says, well, boxing is good, kickboxing is good for striking, and aikido is good for throwing and takedowns or whatever. Well, let's use judo. Okay. And he goes, so I'm going to study boxing and judo. Good. But there's something missing, because boxing requires you to go in there and grab the guy. Kickboxing doesn't. So there's something missing. There's literally a connector that's missing between the striking and the grappling. Well, if you ever heard of Wing Chun and the trapping hands, you might be
Mhm.
onto something there. You see what I'm saying? So you
Mhm.
have to know how to identify things that go together so that there is no conflict in what you're doing.
Would you say this is a process of adaptability as well when it comes about having this adaptation of, as you said, there's a gap between the boxing and the kickboxing where the
Mhm.
grappling comes in, and that's when you actually have to evolve yourself and actually sharp or learn those tools in order to adapt to any
Yeah,
situation.
because so again, adaptability. So that can again be esoteric or practical.
Mhm.
So if I want to learn how to adapt, here's an example of training the practicality of adaptability. I limit you to being able to only use your right side, but your training partner can do whatever, left or right, but you can only use your right arm and your right leg. That's going to teach you to adapt. You
Mhm.
see, because you're limited. And so the thing known as limited sparring, that was a crucial aspect of Jeet Kune Do training in the 1970s, forcing people to do stuff. And you could also take it to the point where the adaptability was a real world scenario, because you got hurt and now you can only use one arm or what have you, or one leg or what have you. So it might have just been a a, a plaything in training, but you could also set it up to be a practical real world thing. But ultimately, adaptability, yes, it is both esoteric and practical. You see, so
Mhm.
that's one example of how you do it, right? Because the training in Jeet Kune Do, especially in the beginning, is probably almost all physical. But what should be sprinkled into the physical training is the philosophical JKD. So what you're asking the student to do is to exist on two simultaneous paths, which is not an easy thing. You see, right? You're either the intellectual or you're the warrior, right? But it's hard to be the intellectual warrior.
Mhm.
You see, so that's why sometimes, because Jeet Kune Do, as the title of Inasano's book is, the art and philosophy. Sometimes it's hard for people because it's like, no, I don't want to be confused. I just want to think in one way. You're asking me to think on these two paths at the same time. Yeah, yeah, because that's higher level. So now we take the lessons that we're learning in martial art and we apply them outside of martial art to our general lives. Because you better be able to think on more than one path in life. You know, if you lived in Miami, right? You know about Miami traffic. If you only have one way in the morning to get from home to work, okay, and there's a huge accident on the Palmetto, and you don't know how to get off the Palmetto and get to US 1 to get to downtown, you're screwed.
Yeah.
So you cannot have one way as way.
Wow.
You know, I was on the train coming down from, I was on Tri-Rail coming down from Pompano back to
Mm.
Miami. And I got into a conversation with these Canadian people, and they're on the train and they want to go to South Beach. And so they asked me, well, how, you know, what's the best way to get to South Beach? And so I had to ask them a couple questions to find out what they were familiar with, because the truth is there was 4 ways that they could get to South Beach. And the way that I suggested to them was unfamiliar to them. You see? So so what they had heard was that they should get off at the Metro Rail station and take the Metro Rail downtown and take the bus from downtown over to South Beach.
Wow.
I go, yeah, that works. I go, but let me tell you about something else. You can stay on Tri-Rail, go to Miami International Airport, and there's an express bus that goes from the airport on the highway with no stops straight to South Beach.
Wow.
But nobody had told them about that. So they didn't have the confidence to do something different. So that's like, well, I train with a guy that trained with Bruce Lee. So I don't need to go outside. All my security will now come because I'm with a guy that was with Bruce Lee. Okay. But that is not a guarantee of anything, because developing skill and know-how in martial art is not magic. It's not automatic.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, your instructor trained with Bruce Lee? Well, that means you got to be good. No, no. Right? Okay. Listen, I'm not sure how much time you have allotted for this. Don't let me, you
No,
know.
you can go. Yeah, I have all day. I'm on you.
Okay.
Your
Yeah.
opinion,
So,
how has Bruce Lee's legacy influenced the evolution of Jeet Kune Do's other than since his passing?
um, so this is a tricky one, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
what we know is that there was a division in Bruce Lee's legacy, the so-called original Jeet Kune Do versus the Jeet Kune Do concepts, right? So it's one of the stupidest things that has continued for an extremely stupid long period of time, right?
Mm-hmm.
But so I would say that the influence of Bruce Lee's legacy is, if we stick to, well, you know what? Bruce Lee is regarded almost as highly online as a philosopher as he is a martial artist. Okay? Because you go to goodquotes.com or what have you, right? You know, whatever it is. And there's a huge Bruce Lee section, right? And, you know, you can find people. Look at his legacy, his influence in the fitness world, right? Muscle and Fitness has had him on the cover, right, a number of times, and Bruce Lee was never, you know, any heavier than 132 pounds or something, right? So, but people appreciated his bodybuilding ethic, and so he made it onto the pages of Muscle and Fitness magazine. I was explaining to, where was I? I forget where. Maybe I was in LA, but I was explaining to people about the Bruce Lee connection to Jason Bourne and John Wick, right? Yeah,
Mhm.
because Jeff Amata, a longtime student of Dan Inosanto, is the guy behind Matt Damon for Jason Bourne. Chad Stahelski, a longtime student of Dan Inosanto, is the guy behind Keanu Reeves for The Matrix and John Wick. So if you play that Hollywood game of 12 degrees of separation from Kevin Bacon or whatever, you know that game that people
Mhm.
used to, right? So if you do a thing about degrees of separation from Bruce Lee, right? Then Michael Jai White is closer to Bruce Lee now because I stunted for him in a movie last year, 2 years ago.
Wow.
Right? So Michael Jai White is now connected to Bruce Lee through me.
Wow. That's interesting.
Right? So yeah, so Bruce Lee's influence is all over the place. But unfortunately, in the world of Jeet Kune Do, you have the ones who, you know, the Bruce Lee material is awesome, so we can use just the Bruce Lee material to grow ourselves. The other group, this is why it's stupid, Ronald,
Mhm.
because the original Jeet Kune Do group says Bruce Lee stuff is awesome and we can use it to grow ourselves. The other group says Bruce Lee stuff is awesome, and so like him, we're going to look at other stuff to develop ourselves. You see? So one group is clinging to the product. The other group is applying the process. And that's where the heads butt. And I understand it because there is a certain security to be derived from closeness to Bruce Lee, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. It's a
Yeah.
little bit riskier to separate yourself and go, man, I think I'm going to walk my own path, influenced by Bruce Lee's teachings. But see, so I ask people all the time, whose path was Bruce Lee walking but his own? Who was Bruce Lee trying to imitate? Nobody. So if you want to really be loyal to him, you think imitating him is the way to go? Heck no.
And if you think about it, he studied under one of the most influential martial arts in the history that we have nowadays, which was Grandmaster Ip Man. He was not even pretending to imitate Ip Man.
No, no, right? In fact, dare I say that the popularity of Yip Man is now due to Bruce Lee? Dare I say that? Right? So yeah, so um I don't know how much how much JKD or Bruce Lee would have influenced other arts, but I know for sure the Jeet Kune Do philosophy of open-mindedness has definitely swept through martial arts. That's why Taekwondo people do weapons now. They didn't in the old days, but they do weaponry now, right?
Mhm.
And today, the idea of limiting yourself to just one way of doing things, that's not so common anymore. People are always like, no, I'm going to study this over here and I'm going to study that over there. That open-mindedness and open-heartedness, I would say, is a result of the Bruce Lee influence.
And do you think in today's area of MMA, how do you think Jeet Kune Do fits into competitive martial arts scene? We see that as far as effectiveness and
Right.
application, right? Sifu always says, go straight to the point. if you have to use as a self-defense, of course, in a competition, you cannot do an eye jab to the eye, you cannot kick the groin. How would
Right.
you say it would fit into in a competitive sense, and it's the same way being effective?
Yeah. Well, okay. So in competition, if you're not effective, you don't win.
Exactly.
So right there, the Jeet Kune Do's ideas about effectiveness fit right in. Okay. Um, MMA fight. We talked about the fitness industry, right? You watch
Hmm.
certain Bruce Lee documentaries, and there are MMA fighters who tell you that he is their biggest inspiration, right? And I think again, it's probably mostly because of open-mindedness, because anybody who wants to rise to the top of their field in competition, just like we were saying about the Dolphins, there's no way that they're not going to look outside.
Hmm.
Okay, you have to inform yourself about what the competition is doing. There are JKD instructors, people like Eric Paulson, like Greg Nelson, like Kevin Seaman. So Eric Paulson currently trains a guy named Cade um, Ruotolo or something. I don't know how to pronounce his name, but he's winning in, I don't know if it's the UFC or one championship or whatever. Okay. Um, Greg Nelson trains Rose Namajunas, right? John Jones was trained by Kevin Seaman. So these are JKD guys. But now here's the thing. In that world of competition, nobody drops the J word over and over again, because people like Eric and Greg and Kevin have so integrated the JKD mentality into the way they train that it has become invisible, so to speak. The Jeet Kune Do is invisible. You see? So
Hmm.
Bruce Lee identified, he didn't create them, he identified certain combat principles. So the 5 ways of attack, for example, Bruce Lee didn't come up with them, but he was probably the first person to quantify and identify them. So that's why if you watch an MMA fight today, you'll see attack by drawing. You'll see attack by combination. You'll see progressive indirect attack.
Hmm.
So there's JKD in that. So it does fit in. JKD was the first to talk about ranges of combat, right? Even though
Hmm.
people, will argue about that too. But ranges of combat, aka kicking, punching, trapping, grappling. So in JKD training, that started out as an indicator of the direction in which you should take your training. You had to be well rounded. You want to know how to kick, how to punch, how to trap, how to grapple. If you look at the evolution of the UFC, for example, early UFC was all about the grappling. And then, for whatever reason, it was like, well, no, and then the kicking and punching came in. Now it is a synthesis of the kicking and the punching and the grappling, and it's given birth to a thing known as MMA. So people can now go study at an MMA school, and immediately they're learning kicking, punching, trapping, and grappling. You don't have to go to the judo school and the kickboxing school separately anymore. You did decades ago, but you don't have to do that. You don't have to do that anymore, right? JKD was never designed for sport competition. But here's the last way I would say in which it fits in. Bruce Lee used full contact sparring as one of Jeet Kune Do's proving grounds. So right there, that sparring aspect lends itself to competition. And athletic conditioning is an aspect of that full contact sparring. And mixed martial artists are some of the best conditioned athletes that there are out there. So in many ways, the JKD influence is there, but it is integrated and therefore invisible. So you would kind of have to go looking for it because it's not being advertised as such. Does any of that make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much for this Jeet Kune Do class. I really appreciate that. What does personal expression means in Jeet Kune Do, and how you encourage students to find their unique style? You've been talking about imitating,
Yeah,
but how do you encourage them to actually express themselves properly?
I don't. See? Because here's the thing. Okay, so think about this, right? How can anyone ever express any other person other than themselves? It's not possible. I can't express Bruce Lee. I can only express Dwight Woods. So I don't have to teach them how to find their unique style or express themselves. I just got to train their butts off. I got to put the best kind of training that I can in front of them and help them to improve. The end result is them finding their unique style. So if I see that you're struggling with something and I have a remedy for it, you see, you're going to end up expressing yourself because you can't express anybody else. See, when Bruce Lee talked about that, Bruce Lee, the contrarian that he was, right? He was going against the idea of the time where in an art, you were supposed to look a certain way. So if you were skinny, tall, short, fat, right? If you were training in Taekwondo, the kick was supposed to look a certain way. Otherwise, you were doing it wrong. But I'm short and stubby. How is my kick ever going to look as graceful as that skinny kid over there who can kick over his head? I don't know. You see? So that's what he was talking about. There was a time where the art was more important than the practitioner. But see, we've had the benefit of 50 years of Bruce Lee to grow past that. So now that idea of personal expression is almost a given. Like it's almost automatic, right? It comes into training. So in Asano's book, they talk about the stages of sophistication. So the primitive stage. So the primitive stage, I try to hit you. You don't have no training, but the instinct of self-preservation kicks in. So you put your hands up to block. You see? And then you're like, well, I didn't know what to do after that. So let me go get some training. So now you go to somewhere to get some training. And now you learn that there's a block called the high block, followed by the reverse punch. And then there's this other block and whatever. And now you're learning some really cool stuff. You see? And you're loving it. So you're at the second stage of sophistication, the mechanical stage. And you love your style so much that you now start arguing with other people about why your style is superior. So you close your mind off to other things. You are now what Bruce Lee called intellectually bound because your mind is no longer open. You see? Hopefully, but there's such cool stuff, Ronald, to learn in the mechanical stage. Most people stay there. The third stage, right, is the what they call it? They call it. Some people call it the stage of artlessness. Some people call it the return to the original freedom, because now something happens and you go back to being instinctive and reflexive, but with the benefit of some serious training.
Wow.
You see? So you don't, so you're back. So now imagine this, right? You're primitive again. Yeah. But you're a sophisticated primitive. Right? But that only comes from maintaining a particular physical aspect and mental and spiritual aspect in your training. Otherwise, it's not going to work. So you know, if you're invested in your training, I think you will end up expressing yourself. Okay, I behave the way that I do because of the experiences that I've had. I am not expressing Dan Inosanto. I'm not expressing Bruce Lee. I'm not expressing anybody. The Dwight Woods that you see is the Dwight Woods that is. Because thank God there's only one. Because the world, right, would be a if there was more than me. Right? So yeah, so I think you just train as diligently as you can. If you're an instructor, you teach as diligently as you can. And that expression thing, that unique style will find itself. Your
Yeah,
people will find it.
that's beautiful, Sifu. And last, what advice would you give to someone who's looking to start martial arts or is interested into learning Jeet Kune Do?
Well, like my good friend G. Anthony Joseph, he says his like one of his questions is why? Why? Why are you looking to get into martial art? What is it that you hope to gain from this? And hopefully they have a good answer. You see, because
Mhm.
if it's oh well, I was thinking maybe that perhaps if uh, see, that's you're going to have a hard time training that kind of person. You see, why did I get it? Why did I start martial art? I saw kung fu and I was like, I want to do that. I want to move like these people do. I didn't have nobody bullied me. Okay, I don't have that in my background. In fact, right, I was probably one of the skinniest bullies that there was out there because I spent a lot of time in the cinema watching this kung fu, and then I would go home and train for hours.
Wow.
And I would wake up in the morning and do it all over again. Okay, there were people who they used to joke that they could set their watches by seeing me on the road doing my road work every day.
Wow.
Yeah, I was a lunatic. You see, so if somebody doesn't have a well-defined reason for wanting to get into martial art, your job as a teacher will be to help them to cultivate, because if they come in and they're timid with their answer, it's probably because they lack that self-confidence. So they don't even have the self-confidence to tell you it's because I lack self-confidence. You see, now, as an instructor, as somebody who knows the tremendous benefits of martial art practice, you can't turn them away because those are the people who need it. You see, but it helped. I remember once I used to when I would do the enrollment, not the enrollment conference, but the initial meeting, right, with parents and what have you. I used to write the word self hyphen 3 times on a piece of paper. And I would give it to the kid across the table from me. And I would say, come up with 3 words that start with the prefix self. And if you can't think of them, mom and dad can help you. So, of course, mom and dad would put what? Self-discipline. So invariably, it would be self-discipline, self-confidence. There was this little girl who once said, she wrote self-awareness. I said to the parents, we don't need to go any further. She can join my school right now.
Wow.
Because I knew I would have an easier job of training some little girl who had command of that type of mentality. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. You see? So my advice would be, of course, martial art is one of the greatest things in the world to get involved in, but have good reasons for doing it, because those good reasons are the things, those strong motivations are the things that are going to keep you going when invariably you get frustrated. But if you can remember why you're there, and if as an instructor, we have that intake procedure with a student, and we can remember why that student said that he or she was coming to us, then we can help them to stay motivated. And as far as them being interested in learning Jeet Kune Do, well, I'm biased. It's the greatest thing in the world, right? But the problem today is that you could come across somebody who goes, oh yeah, I'm a Jeet Kune Do instructor. And because that person said, I'm a Jeet Kune Do instructor, you go, oh, okay, I'll train with you. Can't do that. You see? So it's the whole buyer beware scenario, because you might be training with a guy who is under a guy who is under a guy who is under a guy who was under a guy who was under Inasano. So look at how far removed from Bruce Lee and the authentic teachings of Jeet Kune Do you are. You're like 5 or 6 people removed. That ain't that good. You see? So it is one of those cases, unfortunately, where, because look, if I know how to work this and how to work the algorithm on the YouTube and Instagram, and what kind of video to get the followers and the this and the this and the this, and I put myself out there as a Jeet Kune Do instructor, and I have an online course, there are more people out there who do not know what is good Jeet Kune Do than do know. So I can make a killing. The proverbial one-eyed man in the land of the blind. But my Jeet Kune Do might suck. So in closing out, you want to find somebody who can talk the Jeet Kune Do talk, but can also do the Jeet Kune Do. I'll leave you with that.
Sifu, thank you so much.
My pleasure, my friend.
Appreciate for
My
this
pleasure.
talk. It was amazing. We went over, your background, the history of, of your art, what you've been practicing, and the philosophy deep into the definitions of Jeet Kune Do and movements. Thank you very much. I just want to leave this time a little bit for you to tell. If you're still teaching, where you're teaching, if you want to promote a little bit, if you want to say something, last final words.
So the best place to find me right now is on Facebook at Dwight D. Woods. On Wednesdays, I do the I Love Jeet Kune Do broadcast, which is me talking to the camera on a particular topic or what have you. So that's not as entertaining as Fridays when I do this, when I interview someone, right? Who wants to look at just this face, right? So, and those are going next year will be I want to say I might be going into my 5th year of doing those podcasts. I think it might be the 5th year. I'd have to look. So it's the I Love Jeet Kune Do broadcast and the Jeet Kune Do dialogues. So they each have their own YouTube channel, right? We've been kind of on hiatus because of my traveling for the last couple of months, but coming in January, we're starting back at full steam ahead. There is a website, jkdrebel.com, but that's under repair right now. In February next year, the first weekend of February next year is, let's see if I can do it. Yep, there we go. Titans of Jeet Kune
Nice.
Do, right? That is, that's my seminar with my 2 favorite Jeet Kune Do seniors, Chris Kent, who started studying with Dan Inosanto when he was 18 years old. And so all his classmates in Dan Inosano's backyard were like twice his age. Okay. So they're all, have all departed this mortal coil. Chris is still around. Cass Magda is unique in the JKD world. He's the probably still the only person promoted to the level of full instructor under Inosano in 5 years. I was promoted to full instructor in 13 years. Cass did it in 5. Cass literally lived with Inosano. He was with Inosano like 16 hours a day for 5 years. Okay. So if you go to titansofjkd.com, all the information is there for that Miami seminar. And that's it. Ronald, I will let you go enjoy the rest of your day.
Sifu, thank you so much. I really
My pleasure,
appreciate
my
that.
friend.
I will put out every link on the description of this video. Make sure that if you are on Spotify listening to our podcast, go on YouTube and check the links out there so you can get in touch with Sifu Dwight. And I definitely recommend. He's one of the best out there on when he talks about Jeet Kune Do. You heard it. Thank you so much one more
Thank
time,
you.
Sifu.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you guys for listening to this show and have a great time. Bye bye.